This is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America. On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, we talk to prominent US citizens, not just about their country's past and present, but also about its future. What, I ask my American guests, will be the 21st century fate of their now venerable republic? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Keen on America. Last week on the show, we had an interesting young person, R. Derek Black, who was born into the KKK. His father was a Grand Wizard, and he spent his life extricating himself. His new book is called The Klansman's Son. Our guest today on Keen on America wasn't even born an American, but you will all be familiar with him. Ali Velshi is a very distinguished television personality on MSNBC. He's also worked for CNN. He has had an interesting life in and out of America, which in some ways is summarized in his new book, Small Acts of Courage, A Legacy of Endurance and the Fight for Democracy. It's a book in many ways which is about becoming an American. Ali Velshi is joining us from the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, just down the road from me. Ali, congratulations.
Thank you.
On the new book. You weren't born an American, were you?
I was not. I was born 2 countries away, in fact, because I was born in Kenya, but I emigrated from there with my family when I was about a year old. So I effectively grew up in Canada. Growing up in Canada in the 70s was an interesting thing because you're certainly not an American, and Canadians go out of their way to remind everybody that they're not Americans. But certainly in those days, you were fully exposed to everything American. Your media consumption was American, your music was American. And so you spent a lot of time understanding yourself as Canadian by virtue of what American was. And I sort of allude to a lot of that in the book, that some of that was with great pride to be a Canadian and not an American. And some of that was like, why can't I buy all that stuff that you guys have in America?
We're all born somewhere, Ali. You don't need me to tell you that. We don't choose our citizenship. How does that work out in terms of our own personal narratives? It's obviously an accident of history. You may be born Kenyan or Canadian or French or American. Is there something unique about America being born here, given the fact that it's an immigrant country and the whole notion of the American dream is premised on reinvention?
Yeah, I think there are 2 things that being born here may cause you to miss in America. One is being born in a country in which you have the luxury of not paying attention to or not being all that interested in politics and thinking that politicians are crooked and that sort of thing. Many politicians give you much reason to think that they're crooked or inept, and much of politics is unsavory. But for those of us who grew up, my family, for instance, grew up in South Africa under apartheid. They craved to be involved in politics. Ignoring politics was not a luxury for them. Even growing up in Canada, next to this big giant that is America, ignoring politics and foreign affairs is something that was not available to you as a young person. So I mean, Americans get to ignore certain things, and I think what's happening now in this particular year, or as we head up to the to 2026, we are having to be reminded of that. The other thing I think that applies to anyone who's born anywhere versus anybody who's naturalized as a citizen who comes into that country is you sometimes forget that along with the rights that citizenship confers, including the right to vote, there are obligations to keep democracies going. I describe democracy like a cactus in Western democracies. It's pretty strong. It doesn't need a ton of stuff, but you cannot entirely put it in the closet and ignore it. It will ultimately die. So we have to make contributions, and part of my book is about how small those contributions are to our civil society, to our pluralism, and ultimately to our politics.
The book in some ways is a reflection of your own narrative as an outsider looking in, sort of having the best or the worst of all worlds. Your family is from South Africa, neither black nor white.
Yep.
Was there always a quality of outsiderdom to your family's culture?
I grew up thinking there was, and I think about that and I write about that a lot in the book. But ultimately, funny thing happened after apartheid ended. My family, which had always wanted to go back to South Africa as full citizens, they were given passports, and they went back thinking that they were going home, and they weren't home. They had become Canadian after all those years in Canada. South Africa was foreign to them, and I grew up thinking I might have been on the outside because Canada was a very sort of provincial place. Toronto was a very provincial place when I was growing up. It has since become a remarkably cosmopolitan city in a cosmopolitan country. But I thought I was on the outside. And yet when I look back at my stories, there was nobody who made me feel on the outside. And I actually grew up feeling very, very Canadian, which gave me apprehension about being American in 2015, because I really liked being Canadian, and I'm still a Canadian citizen, and I'm now an American citizen. And even as an outsider here, literally by virtue of the fact that I immigrated, I don't feel any more like an outsider. In fact, there are things that happen in the book that illustrate why I feel not only like I am a citizen of America, but that I am a citizen with obligations in America. And right now I have exactly the same obligation that people whose families have been here for 200 or 300 years have to protect this democracy.
What was it like? You talk about being a Canadian. What was or is it like to be a Canadian? Is it to not pick sides? Is it to be neutral? Is it to be un-American?
No, in fact, I've increasingly started describing it as being a little bit libertarian. Canada had gay marriage rights and abortion rights prior to America having those things, but that doesn't actually make it a particularly liberal society. It's got a lot of conservatives on the political spectrum. We're probably a little bit left of the United States, but most OECD developed countries tend to be. These days, that's changing. It was libertarian. It was the idea, as Pierre Trudeau said, that the government has no place in the bedrooms of the nation. Private decisions are private decisions. Government has decision making over policy. Now, that doesn't make it a sort of a government that's absent involvement. It has, like most other countries have, universal health care. Which also doesn't make universal health care perfect, but everybody gets it and everybody agrees across the political spectrum that you get it. Fundamentally, Canada felt different than America in two ways. It is a country that strives to have their equality play out across society. I think America aspires to that and speaks more about equality across the spectrum, but struggles with it a little bit more than Canada does. The other main difference, which I write about, and some people think it's the main part of the book, wasn't intended to be, is immigration to Canada. Canada long ago realized in 1968 that it is a small country with a slow and low birth rate like America's, and that it is going to not be able to punch above its weight. Ultimately, Canada is the same size as California. As California grows, Canada grows at about the same pace. So it looked to the outside world, particularly to immigrants and activists and refugees. People like my parents say, let's fill our ranks with these people who are otherwise going to the UK or they're going to the United States. We can't get the best of the best unless we make this a uniquely welcoming place for immigrants. And Canada has done that much more effectively than the United States does. More people still want to come to the United States than any other country in the world in terms of immigrants. But America's starting to get a bit of a reputation around the world as a place that maybe doesn't like immigrants so much.
Oh, that's news. Yeah, I hadn't heard that one before. I'm joking, of course. So Canada has made itself a welcoming place, but the narrative of the book and the narrative of your life, certainly the last 20 or 25 years, is of you leaving Canada. Why did you leave? When did it happen? And what's the narrative?
What a moment. I was enjoying myself. It was in 2001. I was really enjoying myself and my life and my job and my career and my friends in Toronto. And then the call came. And when you're a journalist in Canada, certainly in those days, when the call came, you generally had to say yes, the call meaning the call from an American major journalistic organization. And it is something I thought about as a young man. I was never motivated to actually leave Canada or go to the United States, but it's in the back of your head all the time that, that's making it big. So when the call came, I went. And I did it I kept one foot at home. It was always let me go down there for a few years and I'll go back to Canada. And that never ends for me. I go back to Toronto to be with my parents a few times a year, and I always think to myself, wow, life would have been good if I had stayed here. And who knows what happens after the next election? It might be a necessity for me. But I left with a heavy heart. Canada is a very, very big part of my heart and soul, and the book feels like an ode to Canada in many ways. But what I've become comfortable with is that in no way diminishes how American I am, nor does it diminish the responsibilities I have to keep America safe as a place that thrives and continues to have democracy. And I feel a level of that obligation to Canada. And I look with great interest on the other places that I've lived, particularly Kenya, where I was born, which continues to struggle, South Africa, which really continues to struggle with democracy, and India, where my ancestry is from, which is on its way to giving its democracy up, the world's largest democracy. I mean, it is slowly eroding democracy in the midst of elections right now. So I feel like I'm a citizen of the world, Andrew. Before that was a bad thing to say. Now, if you call yourself a global citizen, people make fun of you and think you're something else. But I do think that way about myself.
How many passports do you have?
5.
5?
5, yeah.
I don't think you should tell anybody that. 5?
Let's not. Yeah. I was gonna say, let's, we'll just keep that between us.
No one watches this show anyway. 5. I mean,
well, hopefully nobody from the people who handle passports.
So you've obviously got a U.S., a Canadian,
Kenyan, South African. This was given to us upon the end of apartheid because my family had been activists whose passports had been taken away. So that was a here we're so now it's sort of like a souvenir passport, right? It's real passport, but it was meant for that. India is a little bit of a cheat. It's not a real passport. It's something that India developed because it has such a Byzantine visa system. It's called an overseas citizenship of India. So it looks like a passport. It doesn't afford you all the rights of being Indian, including voting. But it allows you entry and exit from India with no trouble. You go in as if you have a passport. So 4.5. Let's call it 4.5.
I hope you don't have 5 wives, Ali, do you?
No, just one. Just one.
And 5 children. So when it comes to America, I know a lot of the narrative in the book is about the story of how you went from the convenience of living in America, earning your money in America, being a media star in America, to becoming an American citizen. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I didn't care much to become an American citizen for reasons that you now know. I'm fine on the citizenship front.
I mean, you already got 4 passports.
Yes, and the Canadian one is kind of all that matters. I mean, it's one of the best passports to have in the world. And I was joking with a colleague of mine, Ashley Banfield at CNN, and she was a Canadian who had become an American. And he said, "Why don't you get your citizenship?" And I was carrying on about that. There's a lot of forms, and one of the forms involves all of your travel for the last 10 years. And as a journalist, I travel so much, I was quite sure I'd get it wrong and I'd get in trouble. So I said to her, because I don't want to do jury duty, and she lit into me. She said, "You enjoy the fruits of living in this country. You enjoy the income of living in this country. You enjoy the fame of being a journalist at CNN, but you don't want to do jury duty. You don't want to undertake the responsibilities of citizenship. You would just," and I said, "But I'm not looking for the fruits of it either." She said, "You live here, you should become a citizen, and you should do your job." And what I didn't understand she was saying, which is much more important than jury duty, which I still haven't done, is that as a citizen, you own responsibilities. You have agency. We are citizens. We're not citizens of Ukraine, where you physically have to fight for your country. We're not citizens of Russia, where decisions are made for you or you will be put in trouble. We're not citizens of Iran or North Korea or places like that. We're citizens of a place in which you have complaints about the way government is running. You have the agency to do something about that. The voting is the least of it, the fact that you can be fully involved in society. And that's what I think she meant. Join it, so that you stop sitting and thinking that you're from the outside and you can critique it all you want. You can be on the inside and you can critique it, but you can actually work towards changing it and making it better, and in whatever way you think is fit.
One of the aspects of becoming an American is passing an exam. Did you do much reading?
I did. Oh, yeah.
And what did you learn that you didn't already know?
I didn't learn anything I didn't know, because one of the consequences of being Canadian is we only have 10 provinces and 2 territories. So you have time to read about other things. Poor Americans, they got to study all their 50 state capitals and all this. I grew up knowing a lot about the American political system, and I did study for the test. So there was nothing I didn't know, but I was awfully nervous about it. And in the end, they asked me 3 questions. And I thought they would ask more. I was ready for more, but maybe I guess at the time you had to get 3 right. So they asked 3, I got them right, and that was the end of it. In fact, I had to ask the guy, "Is that it? Are we done?" He said, "Yeah, you'll be getting a letter in the mail." And I said, "Is the letter good?" He said, "Yeah, it'll be a letter telling you when you can come to swear in to be a citizen." But I took it very seriously. Driver's tests and citizenship tests, I take very seriously.
Some notable foreigners who became American, Christopher Hitchens comes to mind, treated it in a almost metaphysical way. How did you feel when you knew you were about to become an American, that you'd passed the exam, you were about to join this nation?
Well, the letters are always very nicely written and very, very official. It's the kind of letter you get that's to tell you that you have to report to jail or you're becoming a citizen. It's very governmenty, right? But it said that I had to show up at this court on a particular day. It felt nice. It didn't move me all that much. I showed up at the court. It was in Lower Manhattan. It's a court at which I have reported the news often, but I've never been inside the court. You go in and you have to give up your phone, which I didn't expect to happen. So I'm now sitting in this court with no phone, and the ceremonies are very austere, and there's lots of people there. And so it takes a while for everybody to file in. I'm sitting there for like 2 hours with no phone, and the only reading they give you is a pocket Constitution. So I read the Constitution front to back 3 times, and I'd never done that. I'm like everybody else. I've heard about the various parts of the Constitution, but I read it. I really enjoyed it. I thought to myself, these guys were really onto something back then. And not a lot of it hasn't been realized, and some of it seems to have been misinterpreted. But it is a remarkable document, considering that most of the world was under the yoke of someone else's authority at the time. And then I looked around the room, and I thought to myself, in the same way that I complain when I'm on planes all the time, it's all just a nuisance to me. And yet I sometimes think on a plane, that's somebody's first plane ride, or this is somebody reuniting with their loved ones, or going to meet a sick parent or something. And that's what I realized was going on in that room. It was filled with people for whom this was an occasion of remarkable import. And I need to just stop being being sort of relaxed and laid back about the whole thing. And it was in that Constitution, in the import of those around me in the room, that I realized this is a very big deal. I walked into that courtroom not caring all that much, and I walked out of that courtroom thinking, I'm an American citizen, and I'm going to do the best I can to be a good American citizen.
You walked in as a Canadian, you walked out as an American, perhaps.
Literally, yeah.
You present the Constitution as a unified document, which I guess in some ways it is, but of course it comes out of much dispute, continuing dispute, Federalists versus anti-Federalists,
yep.
Jeffersonian democracy versus Hamiltonian democracy, the Civil War, Lincoln, the 60s, and so on. Are there particular individuals, figures, moments in American history where you think to yourself, I'm really proud to be an American, and this is the side that I choose? We're going to talk after the break, of course, about 2024 and this Trumpian moment. But historically, looking back, particularly at the foundation in the 19th century.
Yeah, look, there are a lot of things in the original Constitution and the First Amendments that I find worthy of great discussion. And I serve on the board of the National Constitution Center, and we get very, very granular about something.
Yeah, Jeffrey Rosen, who's
yes.
been on the show.
And getting into conversations with him is amazing about the Constitution. And yet, the thing that stands out to me as an exemplar is actually the 19th Amendment, because it's later, and it was fixing something so many years after sort of the initial kerfuffle around the Constitution, and then the Civil War and slavery and Reconstruction. And then we looked at this and said, there's still a few things we don't have right, including the protections and rights that we extend to women, and then ultimately things that we changed in the civil rights movement. But as a piece of the Constitution, the 19th Amendment tells me that it's not a unified document. It's not one that wasn't born of a great deal of dispute, but it was one that allowed itself to evolve. And the message for today, which we can talk about afterwards, is that we may continue to evolve. It sounds impossible to get constitutional amendments for anything these days, but we are part of a society that even 100 years after its formation decided it would continue to evolve. And that is the thing that I hold as my hope, because otherwise it's just a crusty old document written by a bunch of smart but old guys who weren't sure how things were going to unfold. When things unfolded a different way, or when we learned we hadn't completed what we needed to in that document, were we prepared to evolve and change? And the 19th, and of course the 13th, tell me that, yes, we were prepared to evolve and change.
It's all about freedom in America. And I want to remind everyone that high quality, great guests like Ali Velshi are brought to us by our friends at Liberties, a quarterly journal of culture and politics. Excellent new publication put out by my old friend Leon Wieseltier. I'm going to run a short feature on Liberties, and then we'll be back with Ali Velshi to talk about the America of the 2020s. So don't go away, anyone. We'll be back in a second.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas. It's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. We're speaking with Ali Velshi, very distinguished American journalist. We've all seen him on our televisions, and now he's on Keen on America. He's the author of a remarkable new book, an autobiography in many ways, Small Acts of Courage. Ali, this is a book, of course, about your own story, but in 2024, is it in its own way a call to action for all Americans to
100%.
manifest what you call these small acts of courage as citizens?
That's exactly what it is. It's first of all, it's a hopeful book. If you wanted to, it can just read like a novel. It's a fast read. It's meant to be a little funny and self-deprecating. But what it's meant to say is that a lot of the change makers in the world, the biggest of them, did not start out saying, these are all the things that are wrong that I need to change. And even if you look at somebody like Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi, who figures into my book, or Nelson Mandela, often they were fighting small injustices, small matters that they could take on. Gandhi would take one particular statute to court and get some sort of victory. And we still see that today. But it's people who engage in small ways, who then meet with success, gain confidence, and engage in larger ways and ultimately lead major movements. Or there are people who do things in their own communities. In a world that feels so overwhelming as ours does right now, it can feel like you have no potency, except you do. You not only can you vote, you can attend your school board meetings. You can go where they ban books and work against that, as many people in this country have. You can make sure you have a library card. You can encourage your librarians. You can have meaningful discussions with your neighbors who don't share your views about politics, about immigration, about healthcare, about all sorts of things. We need to think about society as pluralistic. I think we need to sort of do away with this concept of tolerating other people, because that feels like there's something wrong with them and you need to be tolerating them. We need to really appreciate the freedom of being able to live amongst people who have ideas that are different from our own, but we share the idea of this country. And I think that there is much that we can do. And if you start doing some of these small things, first of all, it adds up to a lot of things. And second of all, you start to feel better about your control and your agency over how things unfold. Because right now, the sense I get from a lot of my viewers is that they feel like it's out of control. Bad things could be upon us, and they're not sure what they can do about it. And my response is, in addition to voting, there's lots of things you can do to protect society. They don't have to feel big. They don't even have to be big. If everybody does something small, we'll be fine. And if everybody does a lot of small things, you end up having done a lot of big things.
But what happens when those small things are different or even in conflict? You have something on your show about a banned book club when you're in defense of allowing anyone to read anything. But there are people in America, early, again, you don't need me to tell you this, in Florida and Texas, elsewhere, who believe that they have a moral responsibility as Americans not to allow their kids to read certain books. Are these people American in your mind? What's going on here?
So the funny thing is, I agree with their right that they have a moral responsibility to determine what their kids are reading. That's never been my beef. My beef is, do not hand that responsibility to the state. I love public schools and I love libraries, literally. But they are instruments of the state. They should not be empowered with the right to determine what you and your children read. So I would agree with most of these people. All of these books that I focus on, they're not all Pulitzer Prize winners. Some of them are really good. Some are books I would never touch. They're not a genre I'd be interested in. But that's up to me. We cannot give up our parenting to teachers and librarians. Now, what we can do if we're busy, and a lot of parents are, is you develop that level of trust with your parents and your teachers and their librarians. You engage in conversations, but kids need to learn things. They are much smarter than we think they are, and they need access to things. So part of the criticisms that come from the book banners is that there is material in some of these books that is harmful to children. Well, we have to examine that a little bit. Some of it is that my kid will want to be gay or trans. Most gay or trans kids will tell you they've been reading straight binary books all their lives, and it didn't affect them that way. But let's put that aside. Some of it is that it's crude. We speak in crude ways. Some of it is that they talk about sexual assault or rape or same-sex relationships at a young age. But that's when kids experience them. We may not want that to be the case, but sometimes at the age of 12 or 13 or 14, your kid is going through something like that, and the ability to read about it in a book connects them with humanity and says, I'm not alone. The number of emails and letters I've seen written by students to authors to say, I was preparing to take my own life, and I decided not to because I saw myself reflected in your book. So I don't disagree with people who say that you should curate and have some input into what your family is reading. My argument is, in fact, in favor of that. You should curate and have all the power over what it is your family is reading.
Are you cherry picking, though, Ali, the role of the state, intrusive or otherwise, in our lives? I'm guessing you probably think differently about gun rights or abortion.
I don't actually. I'm pretty libertarian across the board about these things. I would like government to figure out a way to not spend 3 times as much money on healthcare as America does compared to other developed countries. There are 58 or 60 versions of universal healthcare around the world. I know the Canadian one, which is a single payer system, but they're all different and they might work differently. We just have the one that is the least economically efficient. So I would like government to use its role and its scope to make it more efficient. I'm not cherry picking about involvement. For abortion, I want the government's, it's the same argument as book banning. I don't want the governments in book banning. I don't want the government involved in marriage rights, and I don't want the government involved in abortion. Clearly, thinking humans have to say there are things that governments can do because we cannot do them as effectively on our own, like installing traffic lights and building bridges and things like that. But my general view of things is substantially more small L liberal and libertarian. That in America, our government is far too involved. Let's talk about gun rights specifically. We've confused the right to have a gun with the right to be protected from the damage that somebody who uses that gun offensively does. We've crossed over that line, right? Kids die from gun wounds more than they die from anything else. So I'm not an absolutist about it. I happen to be a gun owner, by the way. I'm not an absolutist about it. I just think that we need to be more sophisticated, and the NRA and other lobbies have prevented us from having a sophisticated conversation about what common sense gun laws look like. I'm not an eradicationist when it comes to the Second Amendment. I think most people who talk to me will say, I think we could probably find common ground on any of these complex issues.
Ali, recently you had an old friend of our show, Ann Applebaum, on. She has a new book out about how, in her view at least, Republicans are fueling Russia and China's global effort to undermine democracy. What's your reading of America in 2024? Has the Cold War been reignited in a particularly chilling way? Has the Manchurian Candidate taken over one of the two dominant parties in this country?
Absolutely. I mean, it's just a given. I follow all the things that are going on in the world, and I think about a few things that look at all the people who want Donald Trump to win. They are, in some cases, people who have encouraged a lack of democracy in their own countries. I look at Viktor Orban. Vladimir Putin is making certain advances in Russia in the war with Ukraine, but really he just has to make it till November, because if American support for the Ukraine war collapses, it is the leading force in having all of NATO and 30 plus countries involved in that. Climate change will, there are people who are dissatisfied with Joe Biden's activity on climate change, but Donald Trump has actually promised not just to reverse all that stuff, but in exchange for $1 billion reportedly from the oil industry. And this business, the stuff that Marjorie Taylor Greene says on the House floor, the parroting of the idea that we shouldn't be protecting Ukraine because it's a corrupt little country. There are two arguments there. Ukraine has suffered from corruption. There's absolutely no question about that. But these do seem to be echoes of things that Russia and to some degree China would like us saying. The immediate the proximate cause of this is getting Americans to stop supporting the Ukraine war and letting Russia take over Ukraine. But Ann Applebaum makes the case that it's actually much broader than that. It is just to cause us to be dissatisfied and divided about our own politics in this country, and to fall more closely into this idea of somebody being able to save us, which then pushes us toward a guy who says, I alone can save this. I don't need to be really a dictator. I just need to be a dictator for a day so that I can do X, Y, and Z. We are slowly moving away from democracy and convincing voters themselves to vote some of our rights away. That's what worries me a great deal.
And we won't mention who that person is. I think some people can probably guess. Ali, you famously took a bullet for democracy. In your book, you talk about maybe the bullet that you took on when was it? May 30th, 2020.
Yep.
You remember it very well. You took
yeah.
a rubber bullet in a demonstration. So you know what it means to give a small act of courage. If Trump is elected in November, in your view, and he does what he claiming he will do, and perhaps shut democracy down, isn't this going to require more than just small acts of courage? Are you calling for civil resistance if indeed Trump wins and he begins to shut down or try to shut down democracy in America?
Well, the nice part is that the Heritage Foundation has put out a lovely document, an 800-page plus document called Project 2025, which is what they will do if Donald Trump gets elected. And I think the message to take away from this is this will be a much more organized effort than the seeming clown car that was the last administration and the efforts to overturn the election after that. I think small acts of courage embolden us, right? They strengthen us. The point of small acts of courage is not, the book is not meant to say, don't ever do anything but small acts of courage. Depending on what happens in November, those small acts of courage hopefully will have caused us to have confidence in our abilities to do certain things and then do whatever else has to happen. My history and my personal history in the book is full of examples of protest in my own family, things that took place in my own family that led to arrests and having the government turn on you. Those are bigger acts of courage. And we all have those within us too. My main point is go from scared and overwhelmed into capable of doing something. Once you've crossed that line from scared and overwhelmed into undertaking small acts of courage, you don't have to cross another line to get from small to medium to big acts of courage. You're on this side of the line. You're on the line that says you have obligations to perform in defense of your democracy. Now perform them. So that's my point, that if you can get over this line to say that I'm not a victim of my society, I am a participant in it. I'm not watching the game, I'm in the arena. Once you're in the arena, going farther beyond that is not going to be much of a problem.
It's calling for agency. I know in your banned book show, you talk about Orwell's 1984, which of course some people see as a call for agency, although Orwell himself was more ambivalent. He had a famous essay, Inside the Whale, suggesting perhaps we're not all suited to be political heroes. Ali, if Trump is elected in November 2024, in a few months, and legitimately, and everyone accepts that, and he begins to shut down some aspects of American democracy, ban books and so on and so forth, doesn't that reflect the will of the American people? If you're calling for small acts of courage, aren't you calling for a resistance against democracy?
Well, you outline an interesting issue, and that is that, Donald Trump, I don't know that he believes he's going to win, and I don't even know that he needs to win. He needs to get close enough to win. But let's say for some reason there was a resounding Trump victory. It was clear. He wins the majority of the Electoral College votes, which would be the minimum needed for him to win. And maybe it was even a popular vote change. Look, then we got a different set of problems, right? Then you've got Turkey, you've got Hungary, you've got India. You have places like this where people have made an act, the Philippines, people have made a decision to go out there and accept what this person is offering. That's trickier. Here's my problem. 80 million people voted for Joe Biden last time, 72 million, whatever it was, voted for Donald Trump. 100 million people didn't vote. 100 million people in this country didn't vote. So I would like first that we would all at least have our voice heard so that your question can be more clearly answered, to say it is clearly the will of this country to go in a particular direction. Then we have a different discussion to have, and I hope we will have it. We will say, okay, in this new vision that some Americans have chosen, in which they've chosen Donald Trump, what are the rights that we should fight to have preserved? What are the rights that the Constitution affords us? What are the rights that we want? Part of the problem with Project 2025 is what it outlines is giving more executive authority to Donald Trump if he is the president of the United States. Now, this has been going on for a long time. Everybody wants this. Barack Obama wanted more presidential authority. George W. Bush wanted more presidential authority. And what tends to happen, Andrew, is that people support more presidential authority if it's going to the person who you like. And what you forget is that over time, you erode democracy, because our democracy is based on a fairly sophisticated balance between the three branches of government. Congress doesn't have a lot of, people don't have a lot of confidence in Congress right now. People are having declining confidence in the judiciary right now. So this is not a moment. It's a good moment for the executive to claim more authority, but it's a bad idea. And so that's the kind of thing. The small acts of courage may change if there is a decisive and honest victory for Donald Trump in November. That's an interesting question. What rights do you fight for when society has determined it wants to go in a particular direction? But I give you the UK as an example, right? In Brexit, it was a popular decision to go in a particular direction that has had reverberations for some years that the UK is still dealing with. That doesn't make it good or bad. It just means that there's more work to be done after society makes that kind of determination.
Two final questions, Eliana, you got to run. Let's say we Americans, or America, vaults over this next crisis of democracy, and in 2026, the whole thing hasn't been shut down. In 2026, of course, America will be celebrating its 250th anniversary. Will you be celebrating?
Yeah, I think this is a country that has emerged from crises. It has faced a number of things head on. It has overcome more than many countries has. And I think one thing that's amazing about America until now, and I hope I continue to think so, is that it does look at these problems head on. It does take them on. It does accept its failings. It is criticism of the system is built in and encouraged. When it works, the structure of government and opposition is strong. It's not working at the moment because we have one political party that's not functioning properly. But for all of my viewers who think, well, to hell with them, let the Republican Party collapse, I think that's a bad idea. We want robust political parties. Maybe we want a third robust political party. We need real reform of our electoral system. Increasingly, the way we vote is not reflected in who's elected. We do need to solve other problems. People think there are a myriad of problems that we need to solve that we're not solving right now because we're in this binary conversation about, do I vote for the one who supports democracy or not? Someone said to me the other night, I have a tough choice to make. I said, you have zero choice to make. I said, that's the worst part about America today. You don't actually have a choice. If you're a reasonable thinking person, there's only one way to vote if you wish to preserve democracy, which is the absence of choice. You might as well be in Iran. You might as well be in a dictatorship because there's only one place for you to do this. I would like us to revert to a place in which we are having meaningful debates about real policy issues, something that largely does not happen in this country today.
So, and final question, Ali. So are you suggesting in the 50 years, perhaps following 2026, that the biggest challenge for America, or the most important thing to focus on, is constitutional reform?
That's a big ask, and it gets very hard to motivate people around that, which goes back to my small acts of courage. You can motivate people around smaller things, right? So it's easy to motivate people if your school board has started banning books to either vote for someone else or encourage people to run or support candidates who say we're going to unban the books. You look at these two guys who got kicked out of the Tennessee legislature over gun rights. It was easy to understand that. Constitutional reform in this country is massively hard. Electoral reform is massively hard, and it requires control of Congress by people who want to do that, which doesn't exist right now. For instance, we're talking about federal protections for abortion. Couldn't get that past Congress today if you wanted to. So, and we've got issues with our judiciary, which really need to be examined within the construct of it not seeming highly partisan. So I almost think like constitutional reform is something that's two steps away. We need to rebuild trust in our pluralistic society and in our institutions, which might take 10 or 15 years to do. Then you start fixing institutions. But boy, I would love it if we had something that looked like a new constitutional convention that was more reflective of who we are as a society in terms of all of our differences and our opinions. I don't think that's the immediate call that I would make. It'll probably be a few